Welcome to Faith, Family, Fitness, Freedom on 100.7 The Word. I'm Jason Lupo with my co-host Aaron Lujan
What's up, everybody?
and my other co-host Jim Miller, just a guy.
Hello, hello.
And well, we want to talk about this. We want to talk about Tylenol and the potential connection to autism. Now, what's really intriguing is CNN posted an article back in 2016. Acetaminophen during pregnancy may increase risk of hyperactivity in kids. Then they posted in 2017 study links acetaminophen and pregnancy to ADHD, but experts question results. Then in 2021, common painkillers should be investigated for possible risks to developing fetuses, experts say. And then this is the latest one. Trump links autism to acetaminophen use during pregnancy despite decades of evidence it's safe. You mean the decades of evidence that you reported on that you were concerned about, dating all the way back to 2016, where you raised the red flag on acetaminophen, but since it came out of Trump's mouth, all of a sudden, nope, he's lying to the American public. It's interesting. This research in general is interesting because I did look at some of the research when it came to connecting autism and acetaminophen. Very interesting results. One of the top studies, I believe, was out of what was a Finnish study, and it took a population of women and basically said who's used Tylenol during your pregnancy, who hasn't, and then they looked at, you know, later on how many of those kids ended up with autism, and I don't think that it necessarily rules out uh, other causes of autism. I don't think that it rules out vaccines. I don't think that it rules out other use. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be looked at. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't question it. But I do question whether or not there's more to this story.
I mean, have you looked? Because I know you're a science guy and you have a really good fundamental understanding of it. I mean, are you able to articulate why the people that are claiming that Tylenol is causing autism, do you understand the science and the kind of biochemistry that they're trying to
They
justify with
didn't
it?
they didn't go into the biochemistry aspect of it. Most of the research that I read didn't
Okay.
go into a lot of the
Well,
biochemistry.
I'm definitely not a biochemist, but I did use AI. So for the listeners out there, this is what they're claiming, the mechanism how this could potentially happen. So, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, acetaminophen,
Acetaminophen.
acetaminophen depletes the body's levels of glutathione, which is the master antioxidant crucial for detoxification and reducing oxidative stress. So essentially, the primary ingredient of Tylenol is depleting the body of exactly what it needs to detoxification and reducing oxidative stress. So that's, I think, baseline what we need to understand. Secondly, developing fetal and infant brain is extremely vulnerable to oxidative stress. So we already have infants that are vulnerable to oxidative stress. When the body's ability to combat it is reduced by acetaminophen, it can lead to neurodevelopmental damage. And you've said in the past that you believe that autism is really just brain damage, a traumatic
Yes,
brain damage. So
I do.
that would line up with what the proponents of, of, of this are arguing. And it may also interfere with the endocannabinoid system, which plays a vital role in brain neuron wiring and social behavior. And then they quote a landmark study in 2014 published by JAMA Pediatrics found that children of mothers who used acetaminophen for 28 days or more during pregnancy had significantly poorer motor development and communication skills and were more likely to have ADHD-like behaviors. So there is some precedent to this, which I find interesting. I just don't understand why this is coming out now. Is it political timing?
I am very concerned that RFK and the Trump administration are potentially feeling the heat from their attacks on the vaccine industry. And by going after vaccines, I'm afraid that they're feeling a little too much heat and trying to redirect. Because what I don't want to happen is I don't want us to go, Tylenol's the cause, and we stop looking at the vaccines, which is my concern is that we're going to say Tylenol is the cause, and all of a sudden we're going to be hands off of looking at vaccines and the potential of vaccines effect on the brain and development and the potential cause of autism. And I think where we see this is all the parents that have perfectly um, normal children neurologically at birth up to 1 or 2 years, and then all of a sudden
Mhm.
they become nonverbal. They show autism like symptoms,
Mhm.
um, which can't be explained by Tylenol in utero.
Right.
Now, the other question becomes: is it safe to give your children Tylenol? Right? If we know that this is happening, we still have a developing brain in a young child. So, is Tylenol the cause of late symptom autism that we're seeing? Um, I think that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask too. I just don't want this to be the end of the journey. I don't want this to be the end of the research. I don't think that we can just write off autism to say, well, it's acetaminophen use. And I don't think that from the research that I've read, I don't think that it's strong enough to make that connection 100%. Does it mean that we should continue to just use and abuse Tylenol during pregnancy? Probably not. We should probably heed the warning. We should probably stop.
I know I'm not going to use Tylenol anymore when I'm pregnant
Well,
after hearing all
that's a
this.
relief.
That's a really, I'm getting a headache right now. I need some Tylenol.
The question is, who would get you pregnant?
Ooh,
though?
I don't know. Why are you looking at me like that? I feel like,
I'm not offering. I'm just.
why are you asking me these questions?
I'm married.
No, but it's I'm married is the only thing stopping you. No, I think you're right. It could be a cause and it could be something, but not to stop looking at all the other causes or all the other things that could be causing the same type of stuff is a very valid point you're making, Jason.
Well, yeah. I think what you're saying is that science is led politically. We're not led by scientists. We're led by
They are pretty big donors. So,
political brokers.
yeah,
So
they donate a lot to political parties and candidates and
yes.
stuff. So
So
it wouldn't be surprising.
this looks like the old-fashioned look at the right hand and don't while the left hand is doing something else. And we just had a show a couple, I think last week, about the CDC director getting fired, and we talked about how that could be leading up to a big announcement that RFK was saying something big is coming down the pipeline. And so we cited in that show that there was a lot of moving parts within the CDC and the WHO and these medical apparatus systems that are like, oh well, we need to like cover up the big news. And so this announcement now that Tylenol could potentially cause autism is definitely falling right into my theory that this is a left hand is doing something while everyone's looking at the right hand for sure.
I think that the industry as a whole, and we look at COVID, right? The whole message in the COVID vaccine was that even though there might be some risks, the benefits outweigh the risks. And instead of letting the American public make that decision for themselves whether or not the benefits outweigh the risk, they've allowed the pharmaceutical companies to do so, they've allowed the medical industry to do so, they've allowed the government to do so. So instead of saying, hey, here are the risks, now you're making an informed consent to take this product with all the information laid out, as you have to do if you were going into surgery. I think we would see a drastically different uh, population in how they choose to take their pharmaceutical drugs and what they choose to take. If you go into surgery, they will read out the informed consent to you. This is the risk. Do you consent to receive this treatment? And you sign.
Right.
Yeah.
They have to read it out to you. They can't even just give it to you and say, hey, read this. They actually read the informed consent to you. And if we did that with all the pharmaceutical drugs that we have, would people make a different choice? And that's a question that we must ask. And I don't think it's enough just to hand somebody a thick packet of information on the medicine they were prescribed and say, make sure you read this before you take this medicine. So the majority of the public won't do it.
Yeah. Well, the majority of the public are not informed, and the biggest gap of information that the public has is the role of pharmaceuticals, pesticides, environmental toxins, and primarily vaccines as a contributing factor to autism. We are not allowed to have that conversation. I mean, when is the last time you heard a mainline corporate television or newspaper say, we've done a long investigative study into the pharmaceuticals in the water supply. We've done a long-term investigative study. We don't do investigative studies anymore. I mean, I'm 44.
I don't even know if I don't even know if that you can feasibly link with all of the information that we presently have any one particular source to autism,
I don't think that's the case.
because you can't isolate all of the variables. We have so many variables. We've stuck fluoride in our water. We've enriched wheat products. We've given all these vaccines. We've inserted Motrin and Tylenol into pregnancy and into our young babies, because God forbid they run a fever, we have to cut the fever down, even though a fever is God's mechanism and part of your immune system
Right.
to kill the infection. No, we can't have the fever. Well, the whole idea of let's kill the fever is, well, if a kid's fever gets too high, you have brain damage. Well, if you give the medicine, you might have brain damage. So that's an informed risk of taking these medicines that's not being given to the public, and so they can't actually make that informed choice. But how do you isolate one particular cause when you have no control over the thousands of variables of what we've allowed these companies to do? They've ruined our corn, they've ruined our wheat, they've ruined our agriculture, they've ruined our water supply. I don't think that you can go, this is the one cause.
No, but what you can do is you can look, the American people can look at a black and white chart, of a statistical spike in autism and compare
Yes.
that to the introduction of all of these modern toxins.
Mm-hmm.
And we can then maybe play the causation correlation game.
That's good. That's
Which you
true.
could, but at the same time, right? In research can be skewed in any direction you want, based on what position you're trying to prove. So at the same time, we started introducing all these additional vaccines. We also increased the amount of GMOs and the amount of pesticides in our food. At the same time, we changed the water supply and how we took care of the water. At the same time, we started introducing other products into our everyday life. Our shampoos, our conditioners, our soaps are not clean. And we're rubbing these on our bodies. We're putting these on our babies' bodies. We're putting these on our kids' bodies. And I just wonder why your shampoo needs 40 or 50 ingredients. And so all of this has changed. So even if you're going to go, we're going to make a correlation causation game out of this, we still might get it wrong, because we've done so much to damage all of these industries.
Yeah, but what Aaron's saying is a good start, because the timelines never lie to you. You know what I mean? The calendar never lies. The math never lies. It doesn't care what you think, feel, or looking for. So it will show, be like, oh, well, autism went up or brain damage went up on people, but we're getting meat out of a tube, and the brain damage stuff started 2 months after they started giving us meat out of a tube, out of a machine. So, I get what he's saying, and it's a good place to start. Yeah. I think it's a real good place to start, because you can be like, all right, there's 50 things that started on January 18th, 2017, and that was a big spike. It's just hypothetical. It's not a real date. Don't look it up, anybody. I just made it up. But
we just try to remove all of the possibilities, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to vaccinate our children. We filter our own water. We do everything in our power to make sure that we're eliminating some of these sources, which I think is all that the American public can do. But the American public has to have the honest information to be able to make those informed choices.
Well, the biggest thing I think you'll find, guys, is that in the early 1990s, the U.S. childhood vaccine schedule exploded. The number of doses nearly tripled, and the introduction of multi-dose vaccines like MMRI meant infants were receiving multiple antigenic and toxic challenges in a single day. So you will find that. You will find that in the early 1990s.
Yeah.
And that is why a lot of the RFK Maha people have gone so hard on the vaccines, because that's what happened.
Well, and you have to look at the HPV vaccine, right? Yeah. The HPV vaccine has several cases linked to it of teenagers perfectly neurodeveloped teenagers that all of a sudden were paralyzed, couldn't walk, couldn't talk, had excessive pain that never ended, chronic pain. And then what did these organizations do? Now they recommend that you give the HPV vaccine. I think it's at 11 years old.
Wow.
Which then begs the question, why do you need the HPV vaccine at 11 years old when those 11-year-olds should not be sexually active to begin with?
No, it's I don't even know what it is, dude. It seems like some sort of sick satanic ritual to give a STD drug to an infant. I don't understand it. It sounds diabolical.
They are giving it to 11-year-olds.
Well, you're talking about. I'm sorry.
I'm talking about HPV.
You're talking about HPV at 11. I went back to the hepatitis B.
Which hepatitis B is hepatitis lasts a lot longer outside of the human body than, let's say, HIV. HIV dies almost instantly when it's out of the body. HIV is not strong enough to survive outside of the human body. Hepatitis can last even in dried blood. And so if you come into contact with even dried blood of somebody that has hepatitis and you have an open wound and you touch that dried blood, I think it's 28 days that it can last. And so there is a risk of hepatitis without sexual contact. In fact, a lot of them, needle sticks in the medical industry, dried blood, first aid, all of that is a common trait of hepatitis that's not linked to sexual activity. So there is that argument, which I'll make that argument, even though I don't necessarily agree that maybe our children need it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the pesticides, the herbicides, the microplastics, the industrial chemicals in the food, water, and air. It creates a baseline toxicity level for these kids, and we don't know which one it is, but we do know that if you go back to pre-1990, autism was considered a very rare condition, with prevalence estimates around 2 to 5 per 10,000 children. In 2000, the CDC began reporting and found a prevalence of about 1 in 150 children. So in 2023, the CDC data reports a prevalence of 1 in 36. So that's a 400%
1 in
increase.
36?
1 in
Holy crap.
36, according to the CDC data. Probably a lot worse.
I don't know. Is this one of my politically profitable problems?
So it may be.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting is a lot of the early studies on acetaminophen were linked to ADHD and ADD in children, and basically calling ADHD not neurotypical. Which the problem with that is I believe strongly that we overdiagnosed ADHD for a long time because we just didn't know what to do with our boys in the classroom.
Right.
And so it was easier to drug them up than to manage their hyperactivity.
Well, it also became very profitable.
It became very profitable. Not to mention the fact that,
Plus, there was no more spankings no more and all that stuff either.
yeah.
Well, not to mention the fact that we're raising a generation of young men that weren't becoming men.
Yeah.
Because men need to be treated differently than girls in the school system.
Well, and if you look at
Mhm.
if you look at exercise and you look at our physical education and you look at recess times, we have taken our school system and we actually break labor laws in majority of our school systems. So if you are an employee, your employer is required to give you a break after you work so long.
Right.
Some of our school systems are not giving our children that break. If you work over 6 hours, you're required to give your
Lunch, right?
a lunchtime. Well, that lunchtime that we give our kids is shorter than what the law says that you have to give an employee. And on top of that, we tell our kids that working 8 hours in the school is not enough, that they have to go home and do overtime, that they have to go home and do additional homework. And so we have treated our children worse than we treat our employees. And then we wonder why our children misbehave or have all this built up energy and can't do anything with it because we removed physical education because we had to be nice to the fat kids.
Yeah.
So we're training them to be overworked, overtaxed employees right from the start, and they
Train them to be
continue to
over-
work
yeah.
off the clock, and
That's what we do.
and be like, oh, work off the clock, keep going, you got to do it. And really start looking at the public education system, and you're like, a lot of it's just memory and repeat. It's not that difficult. It's a lot of patterns and stuff is what I've noticed. I honestly, my kids in the family, they go to public school, but I'm like, look, just learn the patterns, get done early, graduate as soon as you can, because I don't like school that much either.
But
I like
that goes
learning.
back to the removal of critical thinking, right?
Yes.
It's rinse and repeat. It's this idea of digest and test. And that's what our school system has become, is
Well,
digest.
the public education has become that T-shirt that says one size fits all. Like it's
Well,
just there's
they
all of it for
don't-
everybody.
They don't want kids to think for themselves. The idea of the Socratic method is long gone from our public education system.
And you'll find some of the kids that get the worst grades are actually some of the smartest kids you ever been around, like in the real world, like practical doing stuff and creative and problem solving. And they'll get like the worst grades in school and treated the worst, and detention and in-school suspensions, and oh, you're speaking out of turn. What are you doing? You need this. And you're like, man, this person isn't like a compliant, knee-bendy, limp-wristed kid. This is a kid thinking, exercising, doing stuff, and they get punished the worst. And they usually get the worst grades, but usually they're the smartest ones you ever seen, especially in the real world, like where practical application applies.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the modern school system and I think it's a relic of the Industrial Revolution.
Do you think they do it to kind of kill that defiant aspect of the next generation?
So you are 100% correct. The Bell system, everything that exists in our public school system, was based on the Industrial Revolution.
And what
The
was
whole
that
thing
for?
was based-
That was to train the children.
To train them to become and
Just
work
good
in
enough.
factories.
Yeah,
They
good
wanted them
enough.
to work in factories.
So Jim was right.
So do you?
You're right. You're right.
You're right. We're all right.
They wanted to remove critical
right.
thinking from the children because they wanted them to just be good employees.
Right.
Because that's what we thought was important in building up the next generation of a working class.
That's crazy to think about, though. When you really start thinking about it, you're like, the public education system is destroying, eradicating that natural defiance of not complying with crap, not complying with subjugation or being screwed with.
If you're a globalist and you want to restructure society to fit your aims and goals, you need to
Start with the youth.
You need to start with the youth. You need to condition them to be complacent. You need to condition them to be obedient, to accept orders, not to question authority, not to critically think, because critical thinking skills and boldness and intelligence is a threat to a authoritarian system. You have the need to have compliant worker bees. You cannot have a tyranny without compliant, drooling, fluoridated people that want their little gold star and their A+ on their paper.
I mean, it goes back to the beginning of this conversation, right?
On Fetty.
That all the issues is it really boils down to trust. We have generations that have trusted their teachers, which were their managers, that trusted their doctors, that trusted their government, and that trusted their clergy. And I look at it and I go, I want to pose this question because it boils down to this. Do I trust if my pastor looks at me and goes, "You are saved"? No.
No, not at all.
That's not my pastor's job. That's
Yeah.
God's job.
Yeah.
And so if I take that and go, I'm saved, and I live the rest of my life never doing any research on my own, never leaning into God, never leaning into the Spirit,
Never failing, never improving.
yeah, then I'm going to be in for a rude awakening when I die.
Right.
I mean, Jesus literally used the analogy of shepherd and sheep. And so one way that you may want to look at this is that our default position as we're all born is we're all sheep, and we're all intended to be shepherded. The question is, who's going to be our shepherd? Is it going to be the world, or is it going to be Jesus?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's what the New World Order is they want to be the shepherd, and they want to shepherd us into the slaughterhouse, so we're lost forever.
Closing thoughts, Jim?
I just keep visualizing the public education system looking to make sure you're super vaccinated and leaving on time with the bells and complying with inbox thinking. And then if you didn't, they're like, here, do you want a Tylenol? Do you want a Tylenol? Teacher passing out Tylenol to the kids. Yeah, jeez. Look, it's that same thing. If you want it better, be better. I know with like the kids in my family, like my niece and my daughter and my son, I'm always like, look, I just get good enough grades to get done with school. I like the way they think. I like the way they have defiance in aspects that I find very pleasing. And I actually tend to be the one adult in the family that rewards that. So, because I'm a very defiant, very out of box thinker myself, independently going, and I prefer that. And I'm not going to dime out my niece, my daughter, or my son on what they do that's defiant at school, but still, they do some stuff, and I'm the one that rewards that, especially all our creative, artistic stuff. So,
Well, this has been Faith, Family, Fitness, Freedom. Join us on YouTube and Rumble. God bless.
Peace.
if you want it better, be better.